This is Decarbonize the World with Frank Deline, solving the climate crisis while increasing profits in your business. Here's Frank.
My guest this week is investor, entrepreneur, and environmentalist Ibrahim AlHusseini. He's the founder and CEO of FullCycle, an investment firm that is reversing the effects of climate change by accelerating the deployment of climate-restoring technologies. Ibrahim keys in on investments with positive impact and positive returns. Ibrahim, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much. It's lovely to be here. I appreciate being invited.
Welcome. Ibrahim, before we get started, I'd love if you could take me back to the 90s when you started your first business from your college dorm. What was it about entrepreneurship that drove you at such an early age?
Great question. And I'd love to take some sort of visionary credit for being a quote unquote entrepreneur. I just was a college kid who didn't want to go back home and get a haircut and used starting a business as an excuse not to do that.
Right.
People ask me all the time, like, what was the secret to your success? And my answer is luck and naivety. I think naivety is underrated because it allows us to assume certain things about reality that we learn later on aren't true. And one of them is that you're not too boggled down with all the ways that you might fail. So you end up often succeeding because you're naive and don't know reality so much.
That's very interesting. And that's so true, too. And when did you make the decision to start investing in companies that are environmentally friendly?
Well, let me take you back a little beyond the 90s for a second. So first of all, the answer to your question is in 2001. But the story goes back further to me growing up in the Middle East, being a scuba diver. You know, I grew up in a desert in Saudi Arabia, but we did butt up against the Red Sea, which is a very lush sea. In fact, it's the newest sea on the planet. So it's extremely, extremely vibrant, or at least it was. So that was nature to me, is there was not a lot going on above the surface of the water. It was mostly dusty palm trees and locusts. But beneath the surface of the water was a vibrant ecosystem full of life. You know, I can have a whole hour-long conversation with you just regaling you with stories about whale sharks and schools of tuna that reflect the sunlight all over the sea floor like a disco ball. And it's amazing, or at least it was. So over a decade of scuba diving in the same spot, I ended up noticing the degradation in the quality of marine life. And that broke my heart because my favorite spot ended up turning into a barren, full of plastic dump site. I even remember seeing, used tires there, and it was so difficult. So I didn't know what to do about that. And I was already an investor at that point. I was doing general technology investing. And, I took the proceeds from my first two entrepreneurial endeavors and rolled them into an investment company. And then, did well in fiber optics and a bunch of other investments. But being a scuba diver and saw humanity's footprint on the natural world really opened my eyes. And that's when I started to investigate how is human civilization actually affecting the biosphere. And, not to use verbiage, but the biosphere for your listeners is the part of this rock in the middle of space that we're from that's alive. The trees, the humans, the animals, the single-celled organisms, all of the stuff that our unique planet makes possible because we actually have a life support system that no other planet that we know of has. So, as a civilization, we are impacting that. And that, of course, woke me up from my kind of, let's call it capitalist stupor. And as in the never ending quest for wealth accumulation, and stopped and just asked myself, hey, what's this all for if the things that we care most about are going to fade away, or even worse, what's this all for if this planet is eventually not going to be able to sustain life? It seemed like a stupid and simple question to ask myself, and I did. And then that changed the trajectory of my investments.
Wow, you and I can probably speak for hours on this, actually, because I'm certified scuba diver also.
Oh,
yeah, I'm certified up to a rescue diver, and I was working on my dive master. I dove all over the world, and I've seen the vibrant coral reefs, and then I've seen the dying reefs. And yeah, and as you described it, it is a shocking thing. And climate change is having a really horrible impact on our coral reefs and our lives in the ocean, and especially with increasing ocean temperatures and things like that.
I always say that our oceans have always been the kind of proverbial climate coal mine. And it's only when things became hit above the surface of the water did the world wake up. But, the oceans have been suffering for much longer, unfortunately.
Absolutely.
So degradation in the oceans is much more obvious. And I really don't wish that heartbreak on anyone, because the things that you and I saw scuba diving decades ago isn't even available to be witnessed anywhere in the world. Like, you cannot see, no matter how much money you have, you cannot experience what you and I experienced decades ago today. It's just not available.
Exactly right. So, and I'm really happy you're doing something about it, and I'm trying to do something about it too, and hopefully we can reverse that, and things can grow back. I really do believe that the earth heals itself.
Correct.
So you were an early investor in Tesla, Bloom Energy, Clean Choice Energy, among others. What's your hit rate in terms of investing in these sorts of green companies?
That's a great question, because a lot of them are private companies. It's hard really to tell, because not all of them have become liquid and public or bought out or whatnot. So I haven't really done the analysis on that, but I have to say, on paper, it's extraordinary. Like, my IRR over a couple of decades of investing is in the 40s, which is,
Wow.
unheard of. So it's a great place to have chosen to put capital into, but I didn't do it just for the return on investment. I loved listening to John Doerr the other day on another podcast where he said that the first trillionaire in history is going to be a climate tech trillionaire. Again, not that that's a motivation, but it's an indication of how big the market is, which makes sense, right? Because, what is climate tech? Climate tech is everything that runs our civilization, because our civilization runs on systems that were developed in the 19th and 20th centuries that are all antiquated and were never designed to reconcile the carbon math on a closed sphere in the middle of space. They were just designed to put food on our table, transport us from one place to another, turn our lights on, heat our homes, make water run, et cetera, et cetera. But no one ever thought when they invented them that, hey, this also has to have a reconciling effect on these invisible molecules floating around in our atmosphere. That never happened. So all of that has to be replaced. And since it has to be replaced, that actually makes it the biggest investment opportunity in human history. I love his other quote. He said, "Climate science is the new computer science."
That's interesting.
It is interesting.
So I was invited for several years to present in it was Myanmar's Green Economy, Green Growth Forum and Conference. And there they talked about something called leapfrogging. So, we made our mistakes in the Industrial Revolution, bringing in fossil fuels. About 78% of greenhouse gases come from the burning of fossil fuels. In Myanmar, 70% of the country does not have electricity. And they're talking about leapfrogging and when they build the infrastructure, to build it in with renewable energy. Are you seeing that also?
Yeah, I mean, the parallel to what you're talking about is how the continent of Africa kind of leapfrogged landlines right into mobile. There's an advantage to that. And, I don't know much about Myanmar and what they're up to, but, good for them for having skipped this kind of polluting, toxic part of the economy building story. So they get to have the benefits of energy, especially at the low rates that solar and wind are producing energy for today, without having to go through the costs that, other more developed nations had to pay through, toxicity and cancer rates and, mortality rates, et cetera. So I don't know much of the details about it, but I'm happy for them. And it's not just because of the health and climate benefit, the fact that there is no downside to it for them. It's not like they're doing it with concessions to cost or growth, or pulling their population out of poverty. Their fossil fuel based energy, renewable energy are both at par at the moment anyway.
Right. So when we read anything about FullCycle, we always see the words, quote, climate restoring technologies, end quote. For context, can you give me some examples of these climate restoring technologies?
Sure. Can I define that for you?
Yeah,
first?
absolutely.
Yeah. So being in climate tech since 2001 has a benefit. Right now there's, you can throw a pebble in any direction and hit 7 climate funds, right? Because it's super trendy. But there is a difference between being there for 5 minutes and being there for 21 years. And the difference is that you actually understand the problem you're trying to solve, as opposed to just using a shotgun approach to addressing the issue, which is what I see a lot out there in the industry.
Right.
So I have a couple of points that I would love to make. One of them is we're about 40 years late to addressing this problem. And the nature of the problem is multifaceted, but the biggest piece of it is the accelerating heat cycle that we're in. Mm-hmm. So what does that mean? Any summer that we experience that is warmer than it should be historically, results in more sea ice melting away. And it also results in more glaciers receding.
Right.
That means that the following summer, there's less reflective surface on Earth to reflect sun radiation back into space, which means the Earth and the dark ocean start absorbing it. So warming begets warming. So this is not something that we can do in a shotgun haphazard approach on. Not all climate tech is created equal in a accelerating warming cycle. Mm-hmm. We have to make sure that we are getting the biggest climate return on investment early on in the 21st century so we can slow down this warming potential. And that is one of the nuances that I don't see expressed in climate tech investing overall. We do that at FullCycle. And so one of the things that we do is, we don't invest in early stage technologies. The reason is because it's a little too late. When you have these super high CapEx investments, they take in these non-commercial technologies, they take a long time and hundreds of millions of dollars to become commercial. Then you have to spend decades rolling them out globally so they can replace the existing vertical that they're designed to replace, right? Whether it's their energy or whatever part of the world economy they're supposed to replace. So it takes a long time. So this whole idea of using venture capital as a way to address climate change is only helpful in about 20% of cases, because if you think about and those are the cases where we haven't actually invented a solution to the problem. 80% of climate tech has already been invented, and the problem it's running into is the commercialization gap and the global rollout gap, which is what FullCycle does. Is the first thing we do is we prioritize which of these market-ready technologies we want to invest in now, and we prioritize them literally down to the molecule. So which one has the highest climate return on investment so we can front load the impact of our dollars that we're deploying. For example, like if you're addressing a methane molecule, you're getting 86 times more heat trapping capacity out of the equation versus a CO2 molecule, which is the most abundant greenhouse gas, but also the weakest greenhouse gas. So we prioritize based on molecule. We also prioritize based on technologies that are proven. So we don't have to wait around for them to maybe be proven viable or proven not viable. And we don't have that kind of time to do that. The analogy I give a lot is, if you're sitting in a burning building and the fire's in your backyard, you don't go invent firefighting technology. That is not the strategy. The strategy is to accelerate the rollout of existing technology. And in case of fire, it would be buckets and hoses and, and whatever other proven technologies there are to put out fires. And that's what we do is we choose technologies that we consider climate critical, and that's what it means, prioritizing them based on in the vertical of the economy that they're creating the biggest adverse impact, and we replace them with their 21st century clean, carbon reconciling alternative. And then we spend 80% of our capital accelerating their rollout worldwide so we can factor in time, which is something that is critical if you're in a accelerating warming cycle.
Yeah, we recognize we're in a crisis. Just recently in the town of East Hampton, where I live, they declared a climate emergency. And everything that they're doing policy-wise is based on that, which I think is a really good way to look at it from a municipal policy standpoint.
Well, good for them. Hats off to them.
Yeah.
I haven't researched like the, climate modeling for the Hamptons, but I'm guessing when they say that in the US alone, there's over $1 trillion worth of coastal real estate at risk because of rising ocean levels. I'm guessing the Hamptons is a good portion of that $1 trillion.
Not only that, our most valuable properties are sitting there on the ocean, and they're right on the front line. And that's one of the reasons I got involved with our town. I chaired the Energy Sustainability Committee, and I led the town to adopt the comprehensive energy vision. And then I led the town to adopt a goal to be 100% renewable in electricity, transportation, and heating fuels. So we were the first town on the East Coast to make such a commitment. Right now, we're building, Ørsted actually is building an offshore wind project about 30 miles offshore, which will make our electrical grid 100% renewable. So we're making progress.
That's beautiful. So glad to hear that.
So, you're a private equity firm that invests in companies that tackle the climate crisis. How competitive is this space right now?
I can't really tell how competitive it is because we have a unique model that climate tech entrepreneurs come to us for. They're not just shopping around term sheets between different firms, because we built this model from the bottom up for these entrepreneurs. So it's not just money for the sake of money. We have a model that solves one of their biggest problems, which is, I mentioned earlier, is the commercialization gap. What happens to these super high CapEx companies once they have proven their technology and now are moving to commercialization? Mm-hmm. Well, it's a real issue for them because their first commercial plant is very expensive and their valuations don't warrant them taking on all this debt or having to sell more corporate equity to fund these first commercial plants. Sometimes they're just like, it would be so dilutive to do that. So they spend a lot of time piecing together some financing, whether it's through grants or through debt and corporate equity. And sometimes that takes years to build the first commercial plant. What we do is we underwrite the first commercial plants, basically turning them from a promising technology to a proven technology such that infrastructure funds around the world would put, hundreds of billions of dollars behind them over the next decades. And that's why a lot of entrepreneurs come to us, because we're not just buying into the corporate equity of companies. We're also solving one of their biggest problems, which is commercialization. So in the way we make that up to our LPs, our investors, that commercial risk that they take with us is we get an exclusive for additional plants, sometimes dozens of additional plants at pre-negotiated economics, such that we can make up the risk that they take for commercializing the first plant, make it up to them in many more risk-adjusted return plants moving forward.
So I'm not a financial expert, but, I know about venture capital. And is this what you're talking about? Is this the difference between a venture capital firm and a private equity firm such as you?
So we call ourselves a growth equity firm, and we designed a model that is a financial model that's specifically designed to accelerate the rollout of climate critical technology. So it's not, never before have we had this time constraint ahead of us. Like there's no, when the internet was invented or the mobile internet was invented, there wasn't this looming existential threat if this took a decade longer to roll out, or 2 decades or 2 years or whatever. There was nothing like that. It was a commercial endeavor, that was going to take its natural arc to penetrate the market and replace some antiquated technologies. In the case that we talked about, like, mobile versus landline, for example.
Right.
So, and with climate tech, we do have a looming existential threat. So we can't use old financial models like just traditional venture or traditional private equity or traditional infrastructure. We have to develop new models, new financial models that are designed to address the issue. And that's what we did at FullCycle. We developed a financial model. That is our innovation. So, there is no moniker for us to stand under that exists because we invest in different asset classes. Like venture does not invest in infrastructure, and infrastructure does not usually invest in corporate equity of these companies. We do both. And that is the model that's needed so these companies can have a really deep financial partner with them to take them on the journey from at first prioritizing which technologies need the right kind of backing at the moment, because like I said earlier, we want to maximize our climate return on investment and front load the impact so we can slow down the warming cycle, and then create a dedicating funding vehicle for their projects worldwide such that they quickly replace their 19th and 20th century polluting counterpart as fast as possible. See, everybody wants to be first in line to fund the third project of these companies. Nobody wants to be first in line to fund the first or second.
Right.
And that's where the slowdown and what's called the valley of death happens. And we're investment professionals. We have probably 100 years worth of operating, investing, managing experience behind us. We have fantastic track records individually and have come together to bring all that to bear in doing something that's very difficult to do, which is to prove a new financial model. Because investors are not interested in the new. They're interested in the proven. And our job is to invent and to push and to stand on the rooftops and scream from the rooftops that something new is needed, and do it enough times that enough investors get comfortable to get behind us so we can prove the model. And then everybody who's been standing in the sidelines waiting to invest in the proven model gets to say that they knew that we'd be successful all along and jump on board. And then we increase our ability to deploy more and more capital into this model, because we are not asking anybody to take any sort of concessionary return to invest with us. Anybody who doesn't even share our climate ideology also can invest in us simply for the commercial returns. We provide asymmetrical risk reward profiles in this model where the investor is primarily exposed to infrastructure type risk, which is relatively low, but getting PE growth equity type returns, which is a very handsome and very attractive proposition. We just have to prove it. And so far, we're doing a stellar job. We've already identified 5 companies. We've invested in them. We sit on their boards. We're now deploying into our first 2 actual projects from these technology companies. So it's not a black box that we're just asking investors to believe in us or care enough about climate to put their investment capital behind it. We'd want all of that, but we also have so much traction that they can put all that goodwill behind us, as well as make prudent investment decisions too.
Excellent. We both agree that we're 40 years too late, but you launched FullCycle in 2013. And this financial model that you were describing, do you think you were a bit ahead of your time at that time?
I was indeed. 2013, we launched the first FullCycle fund, which is actually a venture fund, which has done really well commercially. But that's when I understood that just investing in the equities of these companies is not enough. We needed a new financial model to invest in the corporate equity of these companies as well as their projects to accelerate their rollout. And that's when we launched FullCycle Climate Partners in 2020, which obviously was not a great year to launch a fund. But because there's so many family offices and high net worth individuals who care enough about climate, they were able to deploy capital into our funds and allow us to do our work and prove our model, even in a year where the whole world shut down.
That's very interesting. Well, hang on, Ibrahim. We have to take a break, but coming up in the second part of my talk with Ibrahim AlHusseini, the founder of FullCycle, Ibrahim shares his thoughts on why investors choose not to invest in environmentally friendly companies.
I have to say that the only thing I can think of is legacy narratives that have since been debunked, but the investor hasn't upgraded their knowledge base.
This has been Decarbonize the World with Frank Deline. To connect with Frank and to learn more about clean energy, reducing fossil fuels, and increasing profits, go to frankdeline.com. Decarbonize the World is a production of Advantage Audio.